discipline system and I was being unfair. And they'd say, I had this happen 3 or 4 times. They'd say, I'm going to call my attorney and you're going to hear from him. So I picked up the phone and I said, here, use my phone and I'll be right here when you're done. And so...
oh, I don't have one.
Yeah.
So one time there was one of the kids, his father was the assistant director of SLED, who called me up, and when I heard that, I thought, well, what in the world's coming now? But he was very nice and respectful. He said, you don't have to tell me. I understand, I know what my son's capable of doing, and you don't have to worry about me. I'll see that he's... So I had an occasional one of those. But there was this guy from Texas that played soccer, and he thought he was God's gift to soccer. And our soccer coach was a no-nonsense guy who didn't care much for students with that attitude. And this student we had rules, and one of them was, when you eat in the dining hall, you have to show your ID card. We know most of the students at SMC, but you got to show your ID card. And that guy would never show his ID card. They brought him, the dining hall people would drag him up by his collar, and the campus police would bring him up. And he just refused to show his ID card. And he did it so many times, and we had a system, a discipline system, and I started it right at the beginning so he'd be in the right track. And he cursed, foul mouth, and there was this sweet little old lady who worked at the door to check ID cards. And he gave her down the country and called her every kind of name, and it would embarrass her and hurt her feelings. And, the first time he did it, I said, look, and I forgot what his name was. I thought I'd never forget his name. I said, look, you can't do that. You've got to respect the rules, and you got to respect this lady. And I said, we've got a discipline system. You broke the rules. The first time, you get a warning. That's all. You just get a warning, and you're told not to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. About 2 or 3 days later, he came back, and I said, okay, you're at step 2. This time you get a fine. You're going to have to pay a $50 fine. You're going to have to apologize to her. You're going to have to take a course in anger management. I mean, we moved them up the scale. So the 3rd or 4th time was the final straw. And I told him, I said, I've told you this. I've told you if you keep it up, this is what's going to happen to you. And you're going to have to get on a bus this afternoon to Texas, to your home. And he stepped back and crossed his arms and he said, Dean Hartzog, I have been patient with you all semester long, but this time you have crossed the line.
Oh, Lord.
Oh, Lordy.
So I put him on a bus. I called his mom first, and she said, I don't know what took you so long. So they called me one night and said, it's Pat. I didn't think I'd forget his name. Because he ended up later on the board of trustees. But
That speaks well too.
That's questioning.
I'd like to think I had a lot to do with that, because they called and they said he's out of control, he won't do anything. And so I walked in the security office, and back then, things weren't too organized. It was an old-fashioned, old kind of dirty room, and there wasn't anything fancy about it. But I walked in, and Pat stood up and clapped when I walked in the room.
Thank you very much.
I had had a long night. I'd already had 2 or 3
this
other
from
things.
So out of character.
And I grabbed him by the collar. I lifted him off the floor. I slammed him against the wall 4 or 5 times.
You'd be in jail now.
He did.
I said, let me tell you one thing. You will treat me with respect. You will never do, I went, and he was like,
Okay.
he couldn't believe it. And so it really eventually he ended up being on the board of trustees at college.
Yeah, right now you'd be in jail for
Oh,
that.
yeah, yeah.
And I'll see somebody that I know I recognize, but I can't remember if it was somebody that got in trouble and is going to spit in my food, or somebody that really liked me, because I had a lot of friends that were students too, but I was always a little nervous about whoever I
Bring him
saw.
lunch.
And several times, one time there was a guy working behind the meat counter at Fresh Market. And
With Cleaver.
Japanese,
no,
Japanese
Yeah.
one, Japanese girl.
and I said, you look really familiar. And he said, well, yes, I am. He said, you might remember. He said, you kicked me out of school at 2005. And I said, oh, yeah, I do remember that. And he said, that's the best thing that ever happened to me, and I cannot thank you enough. He said, I was a monster back then. I was just terrible, and my morals and everything else were just, and you straightened me out. He said, if you hadn't kicked me out of school, he said, I went in the Army for 2 years, and I straightened my life out. And I came back to SMC, and I've graduated and doing well. And right now I've got this part-time job while I work on
Chopping up chickens.
something. But I've had that happen many times, and it's so.
That's gotta feel good.
That
But-
big road.
We couldn't go, the football players couldn't go.
We had Chuck Berry, and
Lord, somebody got arrested.
I would like him better than Bob Hope.
if you know anything about
he's
Chuck
pretty
Berry, you will remember that he went through a really rough spot in his life. He did alcohol and drugs, and that was sometime in the mid-70s when he was kind of at his lowest point, and he started trying to make a comeback. So we had a promoter who is a guy that fronts the money to pay for an entertainer on the gamble that he'll make money off the show. His name was Cecil Corbett, and he looked like the Godfather, or somebody like you'd see in the movies, because he had to put up with a lot himself with these crazy entertainers that would demand all this special food and caviar and stuff, and they didn't even know what caviar was. So he booked Chuck Berry, and the understanding was, I believe, the figures may be off somewhere, but I believe he paid his agent $10,000. His fee was $20,000, and he paid his agent in advance $10,000. His agent was supposed to give it to Chuck Berry before he got into the concert, and then after the show was over, he would get the balance of whatever was owed him. And so people were really excited about having Chuck Berry. They knew he was way off there and, a drunk and drug addict, but they didn't care. So, surprise to all of us, they sold out the show. And Little John Coliseum was jam-packed with most of the students. Show was supposed to start at 8 o'clock. And the contract said we were supposed to have arranged for a backup band for Chuck Berry that was familiar with his music. And he would get there at 6:30 to rehearse with them. Well, 6:30 rolled around, and there were a good many people already streaming in the auditorium for an 8 o'clock show, but no Chuck Berry. And 7 o'clock, 7:30, no Chuck Berry. 8 o'clock, no Chuck Berry. People in the audience started getting restless. They were, they smoked marijuana and got drunk back then. There was a chance they got. And so they started making all kind of noise. And 8:30 rolled around and 8:45, and we were starting to get worried about, it's almost impossible to refund money in a situation like that. Because, you have no proof of who paid what, and some paid in cash and some paid in check. It's just a nightmare. But we started trying to figure out how we were going to refund tickets. And I think it was me, I'm not sure, but I kept looking. We had this thing called the tunnel where entertainers would drive their trucks or their cars right up to the back of the stage from the back of the Coliseum. And I kept looking, to see if we might find Chuck Berry. And right about 9 o'clock, I saw this car approaching, and it had one headlight, and it was kind of rocking when it rode. I could tell when he got closer that he had at least one flat tire, and the headlight was out. And he pulled right up, and it was Chuck Berry, and he was drunk. And he got out of the car and was, just pushing stuff out of the way and kind of trying to stuff his shirt in his pants, and came kind of sauntering up to the back of the auditorium. He said, "All right, I'm here." And we said, "Well, you're an hour late, an hour and a half late." "Well, that don't matter. It's going to be good." "Well, what about your rehearsal? You were going to rehearse with this band." And he said, "Well, just go tell them when I stomp my foot 3 times in front, it means start playing, and 3 times in back, it means stop." So we told the band that, and then he said, "Okay, I want my money." Well, Cecil, the promoter, said, "You already got your front 10,000. You'll get the rest when the show is over." And Chuck Berry said, "Hell no, I want all of my money. I want it right now, or I ain't playing." And so Cecil said, "Well, I tell you what, come back here in the office with me and we'll work something out." Well, the office was the basketball coach's office, a guy named Tate Slock, who used to be the Clemson basketball coach. So Cecil took Chuck Berry and shut off the doors, and they were back there about 10 minutes. And Chuck Berry comes walking out, stuffing $20 bills in his socks and in his shirt pocket and up his shirt sleeve, and just stuffing money everywhere he could put it, and money would fall out on the floor and trail behind him. And he went out on the stage and just killed it. He did a show that they like tore the house down. It was so good. And while he was playing, I said, "Cecil, I can't believe you knuckled under and paid him that money that you weren't supposed to pay." And Cecil said, "I didn't." He said he wanted his $10,000, and he said, "I did give him 5,000. And he said, but here's what I did." He pulled open the desk drawer in Tate Slock's office, and there was a .45 pistol in the drawer.
He understands that, I guarantee you.
He said, "I showed him that .45 pistol, and I said, if you don't perform, I'm going to blow it off."
That's the sound.
Not only money talks.
So the show was over, and he got the rest of his money, again, stuffing it in every pocket he could, dropping it everywhere, kind of half shuffling out to his car, and he got in the car and cranked it up, and I had to turn it around, and I could see, you know, he did indeed have one headlight, and when he turned it around, he had, I think, no tail lights, maybe half a tail light, and went driving off down the road with rubber flapping from his front tire. And about 6 months later, I was watching Johnny Carson, and he had Chuck Berry on. And I thought, well, you know, I just happened to watch. And Chuck said, I want to tell you something about how badly people in the South treat black performers. So he told his side of the story, which was basically he was there to do a very respectful show, and he never mentioned Clemson, but I mean, that had to only be one of those incidents. Mm-hmm. And so he said they wouldn't pay him, they wanted him to go out and perform, they threatened him with a gun, they bullied him, you know.
That's
I thought, Lord,
What Johnny Carson say? Oh, yeah.
yeah, I think Carson
took you
actually.
2 hours to get here tonight.
Yeah. We're not believing. Oh, guess what happened to her?
We promoted the fool out of, and once we got her started, she wouldn't stop. And, so she, for several months, I mean, she just packed the club. The club had almost folded up because it had been managed poorly before I got there. And I started doing all these special promotions like a topless gold. And
Probably wasn't your management.
It wasn't your management that did that.
It was a good idea.
so, I mean, it was a small club. It wasn't really very big, and we used to have maybe 20 people in there sitting at a bar and listening to music. Well, when Sandy started and we'd promote a show every night, there'd be 150, 200 people just jam-packed in this place.
Standing room only.
And so, I mean, Sandy was very popular
Very
and
talented, wasn't
effective and helped save the Officers Club because we made a lot of money off of it. So one night I went to see how things were going, and Sandy didn't show up. I said, well, where's Sandy? And I said, well,
She had BD in the other eye.
she's not here anymore. What did you say?
I said, did she have BD of the other eye?
Far from it. They said that she had left the day before with one of the doctors at the base.
I thought it was
captain.
chaplain.
No, it wasn't chaplain.
No.
He was a captain, and she had married him, and he took her back to the States and to live with him.
Happily ever after.
Wow.
Had a private show every night.